Thank you. Well, I expect Colin will be along shortly, but if we can get going, first task I have anyway is to welcome Matthew Tripic. Matthew, I always pronounce your surname incorrectly. I do apologise. I'm so used to people calling me all sorts of things that I'm not terribly sensitive about other people's names. I do apologise anyway. Anyway, Matthew, welcome to this first meeting that you're of the pension board, and we're delighted to have you on board, and and look forward to your contribution later on in this agenda, of course. And I'd also like to say how grateful we were to Paul Blacker for stepping in during the hiatus, amongst his other onerous duties of making sure that our books balance. He manfully took on the role of pension funds administrator. So thank you very much, Paul, but no doubt you too will be lurking in the background, keeping your eye on us. So that's we won't mind that either. But thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Ray. And of course, I'm going to keep my eye on you. Yeah.
So the first item on the agenda is apologies. Andy?
As I said, we only have apologies from Councillor Moore as representative of the pension board, but nobody else.
Right. So the other members, Colin's on his way,
He is.
and Mr. Gray, we're trying to contact. Aren't we?
We are. Yes, we are. Yeah.
Okay. Has anybody got any declarations of interest in the agenda items, other than those which we've already noted and keep on record? Any new ones, in other words? No.
No.
Do we have any item 3? Do we have any public questions in Andy?
No, none received.
None received. Do we have any members' questions?
And none received.
Well, when our annual report goes out into the public domain, no doubt members will be flooding us with questions of interest. Take them a long time to get through it all, I can tell you. We then move on to item 5, which is the minutes of the meeting of the 25th of September. Have we received any complaints, adjustments, amendments, minor or major? Anybody got any suggestions? Is everybody happy that we should sign? Well, Colin's not here, so he... Sean. Sean, you're mute.
Happy. I was just approving them, that's all.
Oh, you're waving his approval. Oh, you're
Yes.
quite right, of course. We have to vote, don't we?
Yes.
Well, I think we just carry on. If a vote was marginal, then we may have to go back and wait for Colin. But does everybody approve of these minutes? Has anybody got any objection?
No.
If you've got an objection, just shout.
I need to abstain because we wasn't at the meeting, but yeah.
Sorry, say that again.
Hi.
I will abstain on that because I wasn't at the meeting.
Right. Sorry, Rachel. I didn't realise it was yours. Yes, fine. Okay, we noted that. So we'll, in due course, sign those off then, Andy, when we have an opportunity.
We will, yes. Thank you, Ray.
Thank you. Now we move to a large part of this meeting, which is taken up by the Pension Fund Annual Report, which is on pages 17 to 168, which no doubt everybody has read and inwardly digested, and is brimming with comments to make to Matthew, the unfortunate bearer of this particular burden. I think we could say this has already been through 2 lots of hands, hasn't it, Matthew or Paul? Whoever knows the history of this particular document, have we are just being asked to note it, aren't we?
Yeah, right. I'll take you through, in a moment, the protocols around the annual report and the position where we are, if you wish.
Sorry, I didn't hear what you said. Taking what?
I said I can take you through the procedure that the annual report has gone through, the statement of accounts.
Oh, right. Yes, thank you.
On that
Thank
side,
you.
if you want. Yep.
Okay. Then please, shall we start then, Matthew? If you'd like to introduce this item.
Thank you very much, Chair. And Yeah, from my perspective, looking forward to delivering a number of agenda items to you today. I will refer to the page numbers in your packs, so the printed numbers that Democratic Services put on. Please, I will try and make sure that I leave gaps in between, because I can appreciate people will need to scroll through, as there is quite a large number of pages in there. So when I get to that point, I will do that. There is a recommendation for committee against this item, and that is to note the pension fund financial statements and the 2019-2020 annual report, which is contained on page 18. The annual report, as Ray says, is a very meaty document. It's a very weighty document. It is prepared in accordance with the regulations. The way that I describe it, it is the Bible of the pension fund. It contains the statutory accounts and all the policy documents in relation to the fund. So for yourselves on committee, you would have seen a number of the pages within this annual report as separate agenda items throughout the year. Things like the investment strategy statement, things like the funding strategy statement, but it is brought together in one document. Very usefully, on pages 22 to 25 on your report pack, those first few pages of the annual report is a summary section. So if you don't read the whole report, the summary section is a very good start, which we hope is useful to not only yourselves, but the wider reader population on there. One of the main parts of the annual report is obviously the external auditor's report against the statement of accounts. That's contained in pages 83 to 85 is the auditor's opinion against those financial statements. And the auditor's opinion this year was that they did give a true and fair view of the final financial transactions of the pension fund. The full accounts are contained on pages 82 through to 122, so a fair amount. Those statement of accounts form part of the council's accounts and actually went through the Audit and Governance Committee on the 30th of October. So the approval route is actually through there. In normal circumstances, Pensions Committee would have noted and recommended those statement of accounts through to Audit and Governance, but because of the delay to the audit and the impact on COVID, it went directly through to Audit and Governance Committee this time on that side. Under the regulations, sorry, yes, Ray? You're on mute, Ray.
Sorry. Yeah, Colin, you're there.
Yes, I am. I'm very sorry. My laptop battery ran out. I had to restart and plug it in. Apologies.
Technology, quite right. You gather we're on the annual report, which is item 6. Okay, and we were referring to the pages, which are not terribly easy to read, the numbering, as provided by Democratic Services at the bottom of each page. Matthew, can you continue?
Yep, I'm nearly there for you there, Chair. As part of the audit as well, the auditor also provides a consistency statement that the annual report is actually consistent with the financial statements. The annual report has to be prepared and published together with the consistency statement by the 1st of December. So that was obviously a few days ago. I'm pleased to say that we did publish the annual report and the consistency statement from the auditor on the website on the 1st of December, thereby meeting the requirements as set out within the regulations. And I think finally, what I will say is my thanks go to the pension accounting and investment team and Maria in actually delivering the annual report and the financial statements during this period and through the pandemic, through the prolonged audit, which I know has been a problem for a number of authorities and a number of funds who potentially have really struggled to actually meet those regulation deadlines. So I think from my perspective, I think our thanks need to go to Maria and her team on that side. And the Chair, I will refer back to the recommendation to note the financial statements and annual reports and hand back to yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. John Arthur, I'm just looking for your part in this. I know that you have got a report in this somewhere. You're the person most concerned with that. I hope that you were consulted on this on your report and that you were satisfied with what was printed, because I don't think that any of us have seen it. So John was happy. Okay.
It's agreed, and I'd agreed it with. I think it's probably seen by Paul and Mark Spilsbury before going to press. So I am happy with it. Yes.
Thank you, John. Now, has anybody got any questions? I mean, not that we can do much because it's been published. We just note what's been said about us, I suppose, is the way to put it. But has anybody got comments, good, bad, or indifferent, or questions? Colin, good job you're back. Yes.
Okay, it's a one comment, one question. I'm pleased that in this year's annual report, there is reference to RI, so responsible investment that runs through. So I think it's good that it's in there. The question is, I vaguely remember that the new regulations will be that we have to report more fully on some of our investments. I just wondered if I could be reminded of that as to how that will change in future years, or are we now complying, having the RI statement, and then, in different guises, we're saying where our investments are?
That might be something we rely upon Brunel to do, but Matthew, are you able to comment on that?
Yeah, very much so. And thank you, Councillor Haythorpe, for the question on there. I think this is an ever-evolving area, and it will continue to evolve. The requirements that will come through the task force for climate-related financial disclosures will bring new regulations to us. There will be new regulations through the Stewardship Code, as well as others that SITFA will push through onto our reporting. So we will continue to see an evolution in terms of the reporting and the requirements around our reporting, around the issues of responsible investment, and in particular the climate change, as I said, driven by the Task Force for Climate Change related financial disclosures. So it is something that we are very conscious of. It is something that we are working closely, or will be working closely with Brunel, and our fellow partners within Brunel, like the Environment Agency Pension Fund, because we can collaborate to make sure that all of us are complying with those regulations as they change moving forward. So yes, we will be expecting more granular detail with regard to that. It will be driven by the task force on that side and by SITFA. And that will be incorporated through, and we'll work with Brunel and the partner funds to make sure that we're complying on that as we move forward into future financial statements and annual reports. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any more questions, comments? Lyndon?
Yeah, thank you. And apologies if these refer to questions that we could have asked before on papers in the past, but taking your reference page 35, so that's 39 of the electronic version, but 35 of the printed version, it relates to the actuarial fees. Obviously last year we had the triennial valuation, which in effect, if you look at the figures, looks as though it cost 142,000. And it's not a question to answer now. I just want to ensure that that's in line with any quotes or tender documents that we were submitted, and that there were no nasty surprises. So happy for somebody to come back to us later on that one. Secondly,
Yes, Paul, can you answer that?
okay.
Hang on, just try it. Yeah. So, as far as I was aware, they were in line with what our expectation, yes.
Okay, good. Secondly, just is more of a point. It's on the next page, so page 36, and it relates to the investment management expenses. If you look at our figures for 16, 17, 17, 18, we're pretty decent at at getting a budget fairly consistent to our actual. In other words, we're getting a reasonable outturn against budget. In 18-19, we underperformed, and in 19-20, we've definitely spent more than anticipated. And I'm just wondering if it's possible to do some analysis of those figures offline to see how much of that relates to Brunel costs or transferring of assets, so that because if we look at 19-20, so the year we're talking about, we're 15% or something like 15% over on our management fees, and that excludes the performance fees and transaction costs which aren't budgeted. So a fairly substantial overspend against budget in that year. Now, it might be that you're going to tell me that it was because we performed so brilliantly in the marketplace that we had to pay a lot of fees, but I wouldn't have thought that was the case for the first item, the management fees.
Right. Well, I think that's a very good point. After all, you're talking in terms of just the management fees of a difference of between 5.8 million and 6.7 million. That's the thick end of £1 million. And we've always considered ourselves to be, since we've had access to the other 10 managers' fees, the other 9 managers' fees in the Brunel partnership, that we have been probably one of the lowest payers of fees as compared with the others. I think Wiltshire might be close to us, but I think I'm right in saying we're probably the lowest. And so that increased sum there is quite a big number. There have been other costs besides the management fees but I'm not quite sure which year it falls, but I think probably that year, of transition costs, where we have transferred assets out of our care into Brunel. And some of those costs have been quite high. Some of them have been remarkably low, but there have been some which were quite high. Now, who is the best person to answer that? Is that you, Paul, or do we have to go? Can you do that, Matthew?
Well, I will. If you will afford me, Councillor Stark, what I will do is do some more analysis and come back to you on that side. What I will refer to you is the note underneath the table you refer to, where actually some of the increases, and hopefully the note is useful, is actually highlighting that was due to some of the strategic asset allocation decisions. So a movement of assets from passive, which is inherently cheaper on investment manager fees, through to active management. Also investments into the more illiquid asset classes, which do hold higher fee rates in there as well. I don't believe that this includes the Brunel costs of transition. That will be catered for elsewhere within the financial statements rather than the investment manager's fees. But I will come back with some more clarity on what actually makes up those and what was the driver behind that number for you.
I think the other issue, because we actually do pay Brunel's costs, don't we? Our proportion. Now that should have been fairly steady over the last 3 years, so don't think that could account for that. But it does raise the issue: is where in these accounts does that number show up? The amount which we contribute towards the administration of Brunel.
That is in the accounts. I will make sure that I can highlight you to the appropriate part of that rather than scrolling through the 150 pages. I haven't got the page number to my hand on where that one is, but it is definitely in the annual report, Chair.
Yeah, but if you could circulate that to all members of the committee so everybody shares that information, please.
Will do.
Do I see Mr. Gray joining us? Is that right? Hello, welcome. Sorry, have you picked up where we are? We're doing the annual report.
I was watching on YouTube, but whilst I was struggling to connect actually directly.
How frustrating for you not to be able to contribute. Okay. Thank you, Lyndon. Anybody else got any questions about the report? No? Peter?
Well, it's just a quick question to Matthew on, it's not on the body of the report, it's just that he's obviously seen quite a few reports from other authorities. Is there anything that they include that we don't that might be worth thinking about? Because it always feels amazingly dense to me, and even the summary is quite dense. I just think the people who receive it are not going to, well, if they get past the first 4 pages, I'd be amazed. So I just wonder if there's any best practice that we could adopt.
Thank you very much from that. The annual report that you have here for the Gloucestershire Pension Fund is inherently replicated across all of the 89 LGPS funds. We are bound by regulation on what needs to be included in the annual report. So you will find that the majority of annual reports from all funds are in the region of 130 and 160 pages. So predominantly all of this information is replicated across all 89 funds. So there is consistency and transparency across all of those funds within there. So no, Gloucester's report has always been high quality, very well prepared and put forward, and is an example to a number of funds in terms of a good way of providing that information. And those first few summary pages hopefully does help the reader. Not all funds do that, so that is very much a positive, trying to bring that information out for the readers.
Any more questions or comments?
Yes,
Sean.
I have got a comment. I'm just trying to find it. The problem we had this year was that it's the actual valuation date was an oddity in itself. And I'm trying to, because of the way the market behaved, being the 31st of March, I'm just trying to find out whether we've given sufficient attention to that the value of our investments were, well, I'm not going to say artificially, because that's what the valuation was, but of course there was a considerable back uplift by the market, I think just within days, well, actually by the end of April, I think. I'm just trying to think whether we bring sufficient attention to that in the report, and if so, where is it?
Sorry, Sean, I can't help with that. Matthew?
Yeah, I think, thank you very much for that question. I think there are parts of the report. It wasn't fundamental because obviously there are, examples of it through on there. There are certainly some notes around the impact of the COVID and the pandemic in there, around some of the valuations that actually took place in terms of the assets on there. So the auditors were aware of that. It more surrounded things like your property investments, the hard to value investment. So there are some notes within the annual report that relates to those particular investments, that the valuations potentially at that point in time were could have been materially different. So there was a materiality that applied to that, and there are some notes in the report. And again, I will make sure that I make you aware of where that is in the report and what page number that is.
I'm sorry. I think it comes back to, I think we produce a summary of this, don't we, for members, so that they don't have to plough through the whole of 150 pages. It seems to me it's quite an important point to bring out, because they can see a dip, which is, we understand, but in fact, it really was a very temporary dip. I understand the point of view that you make about the property investment. The property is actually quite a relatively small part of the overall total. So I just feel it's something which members want to be aware of, that in fact performance in a way was slightly better I mean, just choosing one date, 31st March, is probably the worst possible date we could have chosen, as it so happens. I mean, there's no way we can avoid it. I just feel to give a true impression of where we are, we need to accent that point. I'll leave it like that.
Paul, did you want to say something? Paul Blacker?
Yeah, I just turned my camera off so people can hear me. Yeah, just to reassure Sean that was an item that the auditors paid particular attention to and spent a lot of time. As you say, all the other investments other than the property ones are kind of valued by the market, and it was a blip in time. And actually, by the time it got to the 31st of March, you know, the significant amounts of market value had been lost, but they have rebounded. But obviously, we're just showing it as a point in time. They had some concerns about property because property takes a while to adjust for its value. But the auditors did spend a lot of time, both locally and nationally, on this issue. So I think we have presented a fair view. But as Sean said, the market has now rebounded, especially in equities, which kind of actually some of that value that we lost by the end of March has now come back.
I think my point is actually, Paul, it came back remarkably quickly after the 31st of March. I think by the end of April, it had most of the rebound had taken place.
It had, yes.
Okay, Lyndon, were you indicating?
I was struggling to reconcile, and I'm sure they're right, and this is the figures on pages 48 and 49, which relate to the costs per scheme member, about on administration and fund management, and then bringing a total together. I mean, I guess the one thing I would flag up on page 48 is that over a 2-year period, the total cost per member have gone up 33%. That's quite a big rise. I doubt that's replicated anywhere else across the county council, as an example. But I don't quite understand how the figures on page 49, so the top of page 49. I mean, let us look at the one figure. Gloucester County Council, the total for 18-19 is £150. Why would we not be showing 19-20 in that column? I don't call as because that's the year we're talking about. And if you look at the figure being 150 in the 18-19, which is anyway last year, where does that appear on page 50, on page 48? So I think we may be missing a column at the top of page 49 being the year we're in.
Good point.
Secondly, they don't seem to correlate to the figures in the table, the prior page.
Certainly do see the missing a column, don't we? Paul, is Paul Blacker, can you answer that?
Or if I may,
You're right that it does appear to be missing a column. I think we're going to have to kind of look into it, unless Matthew's got an answer.
I think I might have an answer. The information that's provided there is provided by external benchmarking across all of the authorities. We haven't, and I think because, again, the pandemic, we didn't get, and none of the funds have actually had that benchmarking in some or all of the aspects for the 1920. But we will go back and double check that and make sure that information is coming through on those reports and those tables, and actually make sure that is there in its entirety.
So did you make a suggestion?
But what I would like to point out, though, is that obviously we're 150 and the national average is 222. So I do think that shows that we do provide good value for money.
Oh, I accept that. But can I make a suggestion that presumably we can get to our figures all right, so that even if we have to, we can put in up to 2019-20, we can put in what we're doing. And if we even can't put in all authorities, we just put a note to the bottom to say what they are, so at least people will have the trend of what Gloucestershire is doing.
The accounts have been printed, haven't they? Did we not hear?
Yes, it had to, because obviously the regulations required us to meet the regulations that it had to be provided on or before the 1st of December.
Oh, so they have been printed. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
But I think
Oh
we've
dear.
missed out there.
Yes, we're playing a bit of catch up here, Sean, I'm afraid.
I mean, that's fair. Okay, fair enough. But can I just ask that we make sure that the two tables correlate to each other? That's the other point I'm making on that.
Yeah, they should do. Yeah. Okay. There's nothing much I think we can do about this lot, but point taken for the future, I think. Are there any other points to raise, members? No. Is that it? Peter, finished? Yeah. Mr. Gray, finished? Okay, well, I think we're all only asked to note this, Andy, aren't we? We don't have to vote, commit ourselves to anything. And I think we have noted it after due discussion. Some points been made, some clarifications required, which Matthew will circulate to members when we have the answers. So we move to item 7, the risk register, pages 169 to 180. Again, we're being asked to note this report to be presented again by Matthew. Matthew, would you like to take us through this report?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. So yes, the risk register, this is a regular agenda item for committee in terms of good governance on that side. Thank you, Chair, for pointing out the pages. The covering report is 169 to 170. The recommendation for committee is contained on page 170. And that is that the committee notes the risk register and then supports a number of items within that risk register, which I'll highlight through now. The risk register was considered back in September at your last meeting in 2020. There are a number of small changes that has been made. Those are highlighted on the pages, and any new narrative shown in red, hopefully for ease for yourselves on that side. And I'll just take you through a few. In September, the risk ratings F1 and F2 on page 171 and F4 on page 172 was actually increased by committee in your meeting in September. And that related obviously to an earlier point, I think, that the Councillor Parsons made, which was around some of the volatility that had been created from the pandemic in terms of the stress on the investment strategy, the deficit position and the funding level, and the volatility that we're seeing through the pandemic. Obviously, we're still working through the pandemic. We've had the US elections during that period of time as well. The recommendation is that we will remain with those risks at a heightened and increased level at this time. There is a recommendation that we're going to bring forward under agenda item 12, which will actually do some analysis potentially to look at those risks, especially around the investment strategy, which we'll bring back to committee later, which in some way will go towards then reviewing those particular risks and the potential for those risks to actually reduce in time in future committee meetings. On page 178, a risk that was increased last time, risk number G5. That risk is now gone back from high down to medium, thankfully, and that's due to the commencement of your head of pensions on the 9th of November, that has removed that risk from its heightened risk of key person risk, hopefully down to a medium. However, that does remain at medium because there are still remaining vacancies in the accounting and the investment team at this particular time. Now, through pages 175 and 178, I'd like to highlight two risks that are being increased or proposed to increase at this time. That's risk AR 1.1 and AR 1.2. And they relate to the resourcing and impact on the pensions administration team. Committee at your last meeting in September received a report from Hymans and a presentation from Hymans, which actually alluded to a number of pressures that are likely to be coming towards the pensions administration section in the future. McLeod, the exit payment, the 95k cap. There is other government initiatives over pensions dashboards, of which the LGPS will need to be supplying data to central functions, as well as obviously a number of increased employers during that time. Committee previously, on the back of the career average scheme and the scheme changes back in 2014, supported an increase in resource in the pensions team at that time. But with these new pressures that are coming through, it is actually adding some pressure to that team. Now, back in September, in the previous minutes, the chair of committee, Ray, did propose a resource review to be undertaken by the new head of pensions. So I think in keeping with that request and in keeping with my view, at this current time, we would like to increase those risks on the risk register. For committee to support a review of the resourcing requirements in the pensions administration and the accounting investments team, and for that review to come back to committee in early 2021. Now, if committee are supportive of that, as well as some future recommendations, I will highlight at the end of the meeting, I would like to propose a slight change to the schedule of pensions committee meetings, if committee do approve those recommendations coming forward on that side. So, Chair, I will pass back to you. The recommendation is on page 170 of the pages, and pass back to yourself, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, have you got any points on the risk register? Yeah, Peter.
Yeah, I've just got a few questions, and they're probably foolish because mine normally are. But so the first one, I'm just going to have to get the number. I thought I'd written it down, but I hadn't. One of the risks. Yeah, so on FD1, it's about life expectancy. I just wanted to query. So we recommend to employers that they try and promote a late retirement culture. I just wanted to check, is that changing now that the life expectancy is dropping? Was one of the points. So I'm not sure what whether it is dropping in Gloucester. I only know the national thing. And the other one I wanted to ask about was, is there any idea nationally about whether the long COVID effect, if there is one, I suppose that answers my question, but is there any idea whether that's going to affect ill health retirement? Because given the proportion of the population who will have had the disease by the time the vaccine comes out, it could in theory be a lot of people if there is an effect. And at some point I want to ask something about the 95k cap, but I don't know if that's appropriate now or at another point.
Right. Now, Matthew, do you want to answer those questions?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think the first thing I'll say in respect to the life expectancy, obviously the assumptive basis is put in and created as part of the valuation process. Now, the fund does subscribe to Club Vita. So Club Vita will be doing the analysis of what is happening to the life expectancy, and I would expect that to then be reflected on the assumptions that are then potentially put through in the next valuation in 2022. So there should be some good analysis that will be provided that is bespoke to the experience and the expectation with regard to the residents of the Gloucestershire Pension Fund. Yes, Peter.
Yeah, but do we need to change the risk though? Because the underlying assumptions appear to be changing. Because the underlying assumption over decades has been that there'll be for every 24 hours you live, there'll be a 7-hour increase in your lifespan. That now appears in Britain to have reversed. Do we need to just allow for additional risk?
Again, if you'll afford me, what I will do is take that one away and actually review that. I do know from experience that the actual increase in life expectancy that we were reviewing from things like Club Vita was that there was a levelling off in terms of that. So I think that potentially would have been built into the assumptive base there anyway. But I will go back and review that, and that will be highlighted on the next risk register, and I'll make sure that comes back to yourself on that side. So your second question. Oh, sorry, Councillor Hayes got his hand up. Is it related?
I don't think we've quite finished. We were talking about the cap and the one other matter which Peter raised.
The second question, sorry, Peter.
The second question was about whether it's probably too early, but do we need to allow for the risk that long COVID and COVID long-term effects are going to affect the pension fund in terms of ill health retirements is really what I'm thinking, just because of the proportion of the population that are going to have caught COVID by the hopefully end of the pandemic.
Yeah, thank you. I think, again, ill health retirement. I think one thing that the fund, you may recall, has taken out recently at fund level was the ill health insurance. So the fund is fairly well protected in terms of tier 1 and tier 2 ill health retirements because of the insurance policies that have been put in place. So the protection is there for the employers as well as the pension fund in relation to that. If we did see obviously a dramatic increase in those costs, that is covered through that ill health insurance. Thank you.
Thank you. Colin.
Yeah, I was just going to say about Club Vita, where, as I understand, we're subscribed to them. Probably in the first lockdown, there was a webinar that I was put on. Club Vita were there, and already they were updating on what they knew at that point, which is quite some time ago now. So I presume Club Vita are putting out regular bulletins or updates, and it might be quite useful to, I think it in part answer Peter's questions. It's always the data and guessing what might happen, and of course things change pretty quickly. So in reality, I don't know how useful it is, but it certainly would help in terms of the risk register, in terms of risk will move both up and down and some of the effect.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. I think you broke up a bit there. What I will do is review some of the information that we've had from Club Vita and put something together for committee, kind of a bit of a briefing note or a one pager in terms of what Club Vita's view is on that at this moment in time, and circulate that around shortly.
Okay, thank you, Matthew. I suppose it is a rather grim but real truth that if the average age of our pensioners declines, it does wonders for our cover in terms of solvency. And I noted, looking through the report that we've just noted, that we don't have so many pensioners at or over the age of 100. So I wondered if that had contributed to the improvement of our funding rate. But I don't think this is a subject which we need to go into now. Just to say that if COVID does afflict our people to a greater degree, then it does wonders for our funding rate, which if I could remind you, Hyman's thought was at 102, was it 102 point something %, which looked a fairly glamorous number to me, I have to say. And I suppose if they were doing that today, there might be a different outcome. But we don't have to wait. We have to wait for 3 years, so we're well covered for the time being. Now then, anything else on the risk register? Peter, you waving?
Yeah, it's not. It's the same question about the 95k cost cap. Will we be returning to that? Because it's just at the point we did the last meeting, they were within day. The LGA were going back to the government about the 95k cap. And the other thing I'd like to, I don't know if it's risk register or not, but I don't know how much information has been communicated. I don't know if it's the job of the administering authority of the fund or employers to communicate with staff about the impact the 95k cap will have on them if they're in the situation where it comes into play. Because all the estimates I've seen is it's a pretty horrendous impact on long service staff. So I just wondered whether that was our responsibility or if it's the employers. But I also wanted an update.
Yeah, if you can. Yes, the 95k cap. It's very much an employer issue. It is not a pension fund issue per se on that side. It is very much an employer issue. Alan and Alan Marshall and the Pensions Administration team have been providing information to employers on a regular basis with regard to their responsibilities with regard to the 95k cap. And I do know that the Local Government Association have been putting out a lot of information and webinars, and only yesterday we had another one which we were forwarding through to all employers where they're focusing on academies and schools, and we're encouraging them to attend those webinars on that particular side of things. I think from a pension fund perspective, I think the regulations are fairly clear in terms of the responsibilities and the funding, so it shouldn't impact on the funding of the pension fund if somebody is made redundant and has an exit penalty or a pensions recharge that needs to be paid. It is the responsibility of the employer, and it will land with the employer. So we are attempting to make sure that all employers are aware of their responsibilities in this particular area, Peter.
Okay.
Sorry,
Ray.
Sean,
you having?
Well, I got one. Looking through it, there's a number of things about failure of staff and things like that, which is quite appropriate to have. I don't think, and I'm quite happy to be corrected on this, there's anything about a failure to control overall management costs. And I'm not just including, I'm including some of the costs of some of the funds. We've already heard that moving into away from passive funds into extra leads to extra costs. But there's also the management Brunel themselves and their own overall costs. And I don't think there's anywhere in there about a failure to control costs or put it the other way around, excessive increase in costs, because obviously that will have an impact. And it's a risk which I think we have to look at.
I think you're right. There is obviously an issue of cost retention. I don't see there's any great rush to increase costs, but Matthew will be reviewing our cost structures, our staff structures in the pension area, and that may lead to further costs coming there. Now, whether that would be significant in terms of this risk register, I'm not sure. But what is sure is that if we're light on the investment on the pension administration side, we remain at our cost. Our friends in Oxfordshire have had unlimited aggro for having self-reported a defect in some of their part of their administration, and they've been turned upside down and inside out. And of course, the cost of that is difficult to measure. So having properly resourced pension administration is extremely important, although the cost may seem to go up. Now, I hope that we're not going to be looking at an increased cost. That would be so significant that it would have to appear on the register. But I think we must keep a watching eye, Sean, on that to make sure that it's held within bounds. That brings me to another question I would have is, in terms of the pay and rations of the pension administration side, who is responsible for that? Does that go back up to the S151 officer? Who is Lyndon? Is that part of is it part of the pension committee's problem, or is it part of the authorities at large problem? Who agrees the budget for the pensions administration section?
Well, I think we do, don't we, as a committee? Yes. Although it's run under the auspices of the county council as regard to pay, remuneration scales, etc. But with regard to the budget, that comes to us on an annual basis, which we do. which we've agreed.
Yes.
2 months. Yeah.
Yeah. But is the ultimate person responsible? Is that the S151 officer? Is it? Is that?
No, it will be yourself
the
as
buck
committee
stops
to set the budget.
We are the committee that sets the budget for the administration of this fund. Now, obviously, most of that information is given to us by our colleagues within the county council, because all of our staff basically work for the county council, albeit, we are the administering authority. We are the decision-making body as regard to the expenditure of the fund, which includes the administration costs. I think that's it. I'm sure somebody...
Okay, Paul, can you help us further? Paul?
Yeah, I can. Yeah. So the Section 151 officer has a dual role in effect. As Lyndon quite rightly said, they're separate organisations, and that's why they have a separate annual report and separate accounts that are audited separately. There's the pension fund and the county council. So all costs of the pension fund are absorbed within running and administering the pension fund are funded by the local government pension scheme. In fact, the county council gets a little bit of money back from the pension fund just for my time and for Steve Mawson's time, so we can recharge a bit to the pension fund. But ultimately, it is this committee that kind of decides that, because everything gets charged back to the pension fund. But Steve Mawson, as Section 151, does have that kind of dual role, but they are separate roles. He is kind of twin-hatted in that respect.
Okay, members, I think we've given this an airing. Can we move on?
Because Emma just said, I think there are 3 areas of costs. I think we've been concentrating quite appropriately on the administration costs of the funds within ourselves. But we also need to watch the costs of Brunel. And I think we also need to watch the costs which they're incurring by moving, say, from passive to active. I mean, some of the active funds can have a very high administration cost, like 4 to 5%, whereas passive ones are sort of 0.1 or something. So I just feel that it's something really for a future meeting, but I think it's somewhere where we don't want to lose sight of how costs can move.
Yeah, well, I think you're quite right. I think that is that there's certainly an area. There are 2 things. There's Brunel's overhead charge to which we contribute, and of course, which funds we want our money to be put into, that's up to us. If we want to pay an active but expensive manager, then as opposed to a tracker or a quantitative tracker, then that to some extent is up to us. And if we're happy to pay the larger fee, we expect, of course, a larger reward for that for our pensioners. Now, I think, Colin, were you not signalling? Did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I think if we do that analysis, and yes, it's important, we've also got to somehow factor in performance, because if the performance is that much better, the fee actually is relatively insignificant. So I think, just looking at how much it costs without regard to the performance would be a mistake. So I'm not sure how that would be weighted, for instance. Just as you were saying, the difference between passive and active, you would expect, although you're paying a higher fee, you'd expect better performance from an active than a passive. So, I just think it's a complicated issue. Yes, we need to try and look at it carefully to make sure that we're not paying more for in terms of management fee and not getting the performance out of it. That would be an issue.
Thank you. Did you comment further?
Yeah, I think Councillor Hay, I think you succinctly put exactly what I was going to suggest, is that I'll take it away, we'll review it to make sure that it's specific, that what the funds, the risk is around value for money. And and also how we are assessing that value for money to ensure that we are obtaining that value for money. We undertake a number of benchmarking activities, which is the evidence around that, and I'll make sure that so Councillor Parsons, you're right, we'll make sure that the risks around that is brought in, but it brought into a degree of assessing value for money in terms of what the fund is actually experiencing and the control around that value for money.
Okay, I think we've flogged that horse. Thank you very much, Matthew. We only have to note that report. Andy, is that right? We don't have to vote. We note it.
If I can check on page 170, it was to note the risk register and to support the changes to risks AR 1.1 and 1.2 and the proposed review that I will undertake and bring back to committee on the resourcing.
Everybody happy with that? Then fine.
Thank you.
Everybody happy? Right, good. Thank you, Matthew. So we move on to page 181, which is the market valuations and quarterly performance. And Matthew, over to you again.
Yeah, thank you. So I will focus mainly, I think, on
members.
I'll focus mainly on page 181 with regard to this. This is the position of the fund as at the 30th of September, and we're asking this committee to note the value of the Gloucestershire Pension Fund and obviously the quarterly performance to that 30th of September. The fund actually grew through the quarter by 271 million to 2.649 billion as at the 30th of September. So reflecting an earlier comment around the bounce back that we've been experiencing during that time. Performance of the fund for the quarter was positive and good at 2.6%, and actually outperformed the benchmark, the strategic benchmark of the fund by 1.1% over that short period of time, over that particular quarter. In the year to September, again, positive over that 12-month period, a positive return of 2.5, again, ahead of its benchmark, at 1.2. I think the more important one is the longer period of performance. And on the 3-year annualized return, the funds returned that 5%, slightly behind benchmark of 0.2. But I think with the activities that we've seen during that period of time, I think being on the strategic benchmark, which is ultimately what the requirements are in terms of the funding of those liabilities, is a good position that we are in at that point. During the period to 30th of September, there's been some continued transitions to Brunel. There's been 2 portfolios, the Diversified Return Fund and the Sustainable Equities portfolio. There are no particular numbers with regard to those in the quarter because those transitions started in September. The Sustainable actually started on the 30th of September, right on the last day of the quarter. So we will be reviewing those as we move forward. In terms of overall performance, I think we will talk in more granularity within item 12 when we receive John Arthur's report into some of the key drivers. But to pull out some performance on the Brunel Global High Alpha portfolio since its inception in November 2019 has actually returned 19.2%, which is 13.2% ahead of its benchmark. Now, obviously, that can, in some ways, bring some concern that are the controls under managers being put in place. Predominantly, it relates to one manager who has a very concentrated portfolio and is a long-term holder of that portfolio that has driven that performance. John, I will assume, will give further analysis and we can provide further granularity in terms of those drivers under agenda item 12, because obviously that will be the manager's sales point on that side. Just to note one point, that the fund is actually holding a slightly higher level of cash. There is no strategic asset allocation to cash. The cash holding at the moment is up around the £50 million mark. A number of drivers for that. A number of employers paid their secondary rate contributions in lump sums in April of this year, which has contributed to that. There is a recommendation that comes through in agenda item 11 that will go in some ways partially to resolve that in terms of just the reconfirmation of the strategic allocation that committee have made towards international property that we will actually do on there. But again, we will do some deeper analysis. I think under agenda item 12, we're actually asking committee to note the performance and the valuation at this point. I've attached for your information the Brunel report. through pages 183 to 235. That just gives a little bit more clarity and information. We are working with Brunel to improve the quality of that report and the information contained in it, for futures on that side of things. So, Chair, I'll just hand back to you and the recommendation on page 181 and any questions, which is to note the market value and the quarterly performance of the fund to the 30th of September.
Thank you, Matthew. Members, questions? No questions. Come on, Peter, you must be asleep.
We might do it in item 12.
Okay, well, if there are no questions, we'll move on. I think, from my point of view, there's going to come a moment when I'm going to be asking Brunel to tell us who the underlying funds are on a simple sheet and how they're performing. The underlying funds that we're involved with, of course. And I think the volume of reporting here is really far too great for us to digest and discuss separately. But as far as the overall performance is concerned, it does seem as though we're on track, at least as at the 30th of September. Heaven knows where this goes. As you said earlier, volatility seems to be, and thin markets is a threat. But no doubt John will give us his views about that shortly. So if there are no further questions, if there are no questions on item 8, we'll just move to the recommendation, which was, sorry, David, yes?
Sorry, Chair.
David?
I was just interested in the comment there about working with Brunel to improve the quality of the report. I mean, as you say, it goes into a lot of detail, and I'm just wondering what sort of improvements are being looked at for us to look at in future.
Yeah. Well, I think part of the difficulty I have, and I don't know if you or others share it, is that I sometimes feel we're being drowned by data here, and we need to have a bit more succinct analysis and a more overall view before going into all this detail, which we could ask for if we want. And we would only ask for it, I think, on the funds which we were immediately invested into. So I think that Brunel have to develop a more customer-oriented, a customer-friendly and shareholder-friendly attitude to these figures, and get their reports down to reduce the size of them to start with, and concentrate on those things which are the most important things. Matthew, I don't know if you've got any comment about that.
Chair, I think you've given exactly the right answer of what we're trying to do with them is provide something that is more friendly and also more visually aesthetic as well.
So can I just support that fully? I think what we're suffering from in the parlance is known as data constipation, which is,
well,
but often one needs for something like this, what I also is often summarized as an executive summary. I know they take longer to write than a long report because you have to extract what is irrelevant. But I would fully support the comment which you're making, Ray, and I think it's important actually.
Thank you, Sean. Yes, David, you were waving.
Yes, no, I'm just going to express the same. I think statutorily and for the other reasons, we need the detail that we're getting, but we do need something that is more readily comprehensible in the form of a 2 or 3 sheet summary on the top. For example, the conversation that was being held around costs. Yes, you can probably get there if you spend enough time digging around, but that is something that we're responsible for, and so it should be much easier to see what it is we're responsible for in a digestible format. But I think the point's been made. Everybody's singing from the same song sheet at this point.
Yeah. I mean, I think you could spend a whole morning discussing the individual reports if you were so inclined, and I don't think we are so inclined. And we need to have a more concise approach to this. So we'll work on that, Matthew.
Thank you for the feedback.
Lyndon. Yep.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of points on the spreadsheet itself. Was it 150? Whatever it is, 181 on the side. Anyway, agenda item 8. I think first of all, good news. Glad to see the back of the GARS investment. I know that was Steve Tyson's favourite, but jolly good to see the back of that one. And I think if we look at that though as a set of performances against benchmark, I think that's probably the most positive and consistent one I've seen in 11 years on this committee. So I think, if there does seem to be, we do seem to be a touch above benchmark all the way through virtually all the way through. And that is the first time I think we can honestly say that in certainly in 11 years. So I think that's very encouraging. Can I just pick up one minor point of detail? And it's in the bigger report, which is a bit lower down, and it's on page 187. The FAANG acronym, I thought it was M and not an N in the middle of that. Because I thought it was Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Microsoft and Google. Now, maybe I've got that wrong, but it's in there twice. Or has Netflix overtaken Microsoft?
Might have done, yes.
John will answer that question.
the N refers to Netflix.
Okay, then with those reservations and comments, we note this, and Matthew, you've got a bit of work to do to take away to see if we can get these more user-friendly. I think that's the main thing. And now moving, and also, it's very pleasing to see as many pluses as we've seen on before, as Lyndon has rightly pointed out. How anybody ever makes any money out of fixed income today is a mystery to me, but there we are. That's some appear to be willing to take that task on. Okay, then we'll move to item 9, and I think Andy is going to remind me to read this out.
Yes, please.
Okay, well, anybody who's so inclined can listen. In accordance with section 100A(4) of the Local Government Act 1972, the public be excluded from the meeting of the following agenda items because it is likely that if members of the public were present, there would be disclosure to them of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of part 1 of schedule 12A to the Act, and the public interest in withholding the information outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information to the public. And I think we need a vote, don't we, Andy?
If we could please, can we just have the committee's agreement to go into exempt session, please?
So anybody, can we just put up our hands if we agree, please?
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, Ray, can we just...
Okay, that's agreed. So we now move on to exempt minutes.